Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Velenasi Mwale Munsanje, and I work as the Media Center Manager at Zambia's International School of Lusaka. This webinar is brought to you by the African Library and Information Association and Institutions, AFLIA. It is a growing concern for most libraries, especially in Africa, to shift from performing the traditional role of libraries. AFLIA, which is the trusted voice of the African library and information community in Africa's development, is interested in building a strong, virile African sector that would meet the demands of today, as well as create a future for Africa, the Africa we want. We are aware that data holds the inherent potential to transform the world, more especially open data. The promotion of open data presents librarians with amazing insights, which can be converted into actions for the greater community. African libraries and librarians need to be aware of the benefits, challenges of open data and the obstacles to finding and using it. AFLIA has organized this webinar to do just that. Today, we are presenting this webinar entitled Open Data, Possibilities and Pathways for African Libraries. I would now like to introduce today's presenter. Our webinar today will be presented by Mr. Oluwaseun David Adepoju. Mr. Adepoju is the institution librarian and research methods faculty at the African Leadership University in Kigali, Rwanda. He is a technology advocate with his organization, TechMeet Africa. He was named the Ibadan #1 technology influencer in 2018, amidst winning the Shiny Life TSL Africa Award for Technology and Innovation in Southwest Nigeria. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the question and answer box in your Zoom panel, in the Zoom control panel, and they'll be attended to later. You are also encouraged to chat about this webinar using the chat box. And I can see that most of you are already using this. Well done. Please do remember to mute your microphone so that we do not have too much interference. If possible, you could use headsets for better sound output. Let me now hand over to Mr. Adepoju. Mr. Adepoju, over to you.
Thank you very much, Val. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Val. It's my greatest pleasure to be part of this webinar today. And believe me, there's no better time to have this conversation than now. As custodians of knowledge and information on the African continent, we are well positioned to embrace new technologies and ideas that would make us an indispensable force in the global knowledge economy. And I'm very glad to be having this conversation with us at this time. It's a very great pleasure for me. And let me quickly state that we are not here to have an exhaustive or conclusive session, because what we are discussing today is a very broad topic that we cannot exhaust in 1 hour, but I'll try and do justice to the few insights that we're going to explore today. And we are going to kickstart a conversation that is not conclusive, but a kind of conversation that would continue until all the African librarians become compliant with the 4th Industrial Revolution. And so today we are going to be talking about open data, and this is one of the biggest conversations we can have in any profession today, because in the past, crude oil used to be the most valuable resource that every country looks forward to having on their soil. But these days, we talk about the fact that data is the new oil. And it is very important for us as librarians to position ourselves to be custodians of this data, to make us more relevant in our professions, and to also help our society in terms of information access. So I'm very glad that we're having this conversation at this time. So today, we're going to be talking about open data, possibilities and pathways for African libraries. And I'm very glad that librarians from all African countries have gathered around this very interesting topic today. So we're going to have this outline to discuss. So we're going to discuss data as the new oil or the new nuclear bomb. That sounds interesting, and I look forward to having this conversation. So then what exactly is open data? We've heard about data, big data, open data. We are going to clarify if there are differences between these terms. And then what types of data are African libraries supposed to be collecting at this point in time? And we're going to be discussing solutions that are Afro-centric. You know, the kind of data that we're supposed to be collecting as African libraries. Then we're going to talk about privacy issues with data collection, curation, and solutions. And you would agree with me that this is one of the another very interesting topic when we talk about the global data pool. Then we talk about new roles for us as African libraries and librarians in the open data era. And then we are going to have conclude with questions and answer. So I'll start by giving us this short definition that is not a definition in itself. So talking about what exactly is data. So this is a professor of technology, science and technology in 2016. So one of his students asked him in one of his classes to define what data means. And I was very privileged to be in this class in 2016 in South Korea. And this is the response of the professor. So he said, I would rather tell you what data can do than to tell you what it means. He said, we are not some students of subject matter, but students of problem. In Africa, generally, when we talk about new technologies and we talk about new things that are coming up in our profession and in the society generally, we tend to focus more on the definition of those terms than to focus on the problems that those new technologies can actually solve. So this definition seems to be one of the best definition of data for me, because we run a society that focuses more on definition than solving problems. And you would agree with me that many of us, if we that drive our cars, we buy fuel at fuel stations without asking where exactly the crude oil came from. So exactly is the same with data. Instead of us to ask questions and you know, try to define what data means, I think we should first of all focus on what exactly can data do for us as a profession, as a country, and as a society generally. So when we talk about data, we should be focused on problem solving, not first of all trying to find the definition of data. As long as we buy fuel in the fuel station and then we don't ask where the crude oil came from, then the same we should do for data, since we are talking about the fact that data is the new oil. So let's check this out. So what exactly is data? So this definition is very important, and I highlighted these words in another color for us to pay attention to it. I want us to lay emphasis on those words that I highlighted in another color. So data are the meaningless entities such as numbers, symbols, images, and characters that need interpretation and meaning, either from humans or machine. So when we talk about data, sometimes we think about statistics. We think about these big words that we don't even understand what it means. But the truth is, data in itself is meaningless until meaning is added to it, or until an interpretation is given to it, either from humans or machine. So data could mean anything. It could mean symbols, it could mean numbers, it could mean images, characters, but they are meaningless at that point until interpretation and meaning, until an analysis is conducted on those data for us to have like meaning and make decisions from the data. And this analysis and meaning will come from humans or machine. And in this conversation, we are going to get to a point where we talk about the fact that there's a difference between the traditional data that we've always talked about and big data. And I'm sure it will be an interesting conversation. So data could also be qualitative or qualitative. So in this day and age, there's something called naked statistics. And what do we mean by this? We are talking about the fact that it is not only the numbers or symbols or images that we can classify as data. I'm sure some of us are public librarians, academic librarians, and some of us even teach in the classroom, and we teach our students how to conduct research. And in the research, we talk about qualitative research and quantitative research. So in qualitative research, we conduct more interviews. And some of these interview responses that we get, they are also termed as data, even though they are not in numbers and symbols and in statistics, but they are sentences that we can subject to opinion analytics. And they also help us in making decisions. They also help us in making inferences. And they also help us in developing products to help our society. So data could be qualitative and it could be quantitative. So when we hear data, don't let our mind, first of all, go to the fact that we're talking about mathematics and statistics. We have naked statistics. And what do we mean by naked statistics? We are talking about sentences and tests that we can also subject to opinion analytics in a qualitative way. So the new oil is here. 100 years ago, countries like Saudi Arabia, became one of the richest countries in the world because of the discovery of crude oil on their soil. But it is amazing to note that these days, companies such as Amazon, Google, Alibaba, and Facebook are the new masters of the universe because they are riding on the data dividends to create solutions and to make global businesses that brings a lot of wealth and money to them. So when we say data is the new oil, we are simply saying that the technology environment and the technology companies and the organizations who are embracing new technology in terms of data dividends are the ones that are the new masters of the universe, and crude oil seems to be going to relegation in terms of wealth creation for countries and to individuals, which means data is the new oil and we must look into it. So crude oil products are used and depleted, but data can back new data and reused. So the advantage of this new oil data that we're talking about is the fact that we can reuse it. When you extract crude oil and you get all the other products, by the time you drive your car with 10 liters of fuel, a point will come that the fuel would finish. But it's not the same with data. Data creates new insights, creates new data, and can also be reused. And then in this day and age, decisions have become very precise, because of the use of data. In the past, we used historical perspectives in making our decision for the future. And then we also use intuition, we use experiences. And then oftentimes, those decisions failed because they were not precise. They were based on intuition. But in this day and age, data has created an environment for us to make precise decisions. We don't need to continue to do trial and error in this day and age. Data has given us the opportunity to make precise decisions. And then data distinguishes between hard workers and smart workers. You would agree with me that you can run a business for 40 years, traditional businesses, and then another company that came in the last 5 years that used the data dividends era to run their businesses are becoming richer than businesses that have existed 40 years ago. And I'm going to show you in the course of this presentation the statistics that makes the difference between hard workers and smart workers. In the past, they used to tell us professionals to be hard workers, but in this day and age, we need to be smart workers by using data. So we must have heard a lot of things about big data and what exactly is big data. I want us to know that from 2008, the global per capita capacity to generate data has increased by 40% every year since 2008. which means with technology advancement, we have been gathering a lot of data that physical hardware and storage facilities cannot contain. So that gave birth to the new field that we call big data. And these are the, I'll just give us four comparison area between data, big data and small data. So for big data, in terms of data condition, big data is unstructured. So because we distribute this data into clouds, because we don't have physical hardware and storage facilities to actually house this enormous data that we are generating globally. You know, there's increase in mobile phone use. I hope we know that as you're generating a content on your Facebook page, on your Twitter page, you are adding to the global data pool. Every little thing you do in the interconnected world today generates more data, and it's being added to the global data pool. Have you also wondered why Google has a program called Google Photos and Google Drives? And then you can save pictures from 10 years back in your Google Drive with natural synchronization. And you are wondering where the thing is being saved. It's being saved in the cloud. And this is the reality of the 21st century. And then for small data, the data is ready for analysis, is on flat file, and needs no need for margin tables. So for example, in the normal survey research that we conduct, in the normal questionnaire responses that we get, we're actually conducting small data research because the data has a focus and it's ready for analysis. We know that, for example, you have conducted a research on the impact of nutrition on learning outcomes for secondary school students in Tanzania, for example. You know that the data you are gathering is for those variables in your title. So they are ready for analysis. But in big data, we are getting data from weather, we are getting agricultural data, we are getting health information data, we are getting census data, and we are putting all of them in the cloud. So that if we want to make a decision between weather and health condition of the rural people living in Tanzania, we can do a relational analysis right from the cloud, and we get the new data that we want. So that is the difference between big data and small data in terms of data condition. In terms of location, as I've said, big data lives in the cloud because we don't have the physical space to house the enormous data that we are generating globally now. But for small data, we save it in all our relational databases on our desktop and on our local computers. So for data size, we have over 50,000 variables, over 50,000 individuals, random samples, and unstructured data in big data. And all of them are just in the cloud, and we can retrieve them anytime to make decisions. While for small data, in terms of data size, they are in spreadsheets that can be viewed on a few sheets of paper. So that is the difference in terms of data size. And for data purpose, in big data, there's no intended purpose for gathering this data. We are gathering them for consistent use and for consistent decision making. But for small data, you have a purpose for gathering the data. As I've said, for example, in some of our survey researches, you know that you are gathering this data to solve a particular problem straight away, and you get your response. But for big data, we are adding to the global data pool for future use and for reuse over time. So this is the basic differences between big data and small data. So I mentioned initially that data differentiates between hard workers and smart workers. So in this chart that we can see here, we can see that the first 5 companies on this list are technology companies: Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Facebook. And these companies, some of them are just 15 years old, and they have overtaken companies like ExxonMobil and even Bank of America because of data. They are using data to make their decision, and you can see that in market value, they've overtaken all the traditional companies that existed even 50 years before they came. So this tells us that something is going on, and we cannot afford to be late as information professionals. This is a very great opportunity for us to learn about data and ride on the dividends of this data to enhance our work and to provide solutions to societal problems. So what is open data? So as librarians, I'm sure that we have over time discussed and even written papers about open access, open data, open source, and all. And I want us to go back memory lane to circa year 2000 when the discussions about open data became full-blown. And then organizations like Creative Commons started advocating for the fact that most research, especially in the West, were conducted by taxpayers' money. And the citizens must have access to this data. And it is unfair for us to pay for data that came out of the research that was conducted by the tax I paid as a citizen of my country. And it's also noted that we're in a global knowledge economy, and it is important that we have access to data and research results without having to pay or to go through a long bureaucratic way of debunking a password. So the conversation around open data and open source and open access became more successful over the years. And it is surprising that the conversation that brought about the realization of open data was open governance, where governments of countries were encouraged to open their data to the public to help them have access to what the government is doing and to have access to the transparent way the government of these countries have been running the country. And it's amazing that this day and age, we have government of nations having websites with .gov, opendata.gov. So the US has, Canada, UK, and some of African countries have also joined in the open data dividends for government information. So open data is data that is available and accessible to anybody, regardless of class, regardless of age, regardless of societal strata or status. Open data means that the data is available and accessible at any point in time without discrimination and password. That is what open data means in terms of availability and accessibility. Then open data can be defined as a data that can be used, reused, and redistributed. So unlike crude oil, that once you extract the peripherals like diesel and all the other fuel, and once you use this fuel, you burn them and they cannot be reused. Rather, they pollute the environment. But this is not the case with this new oil that we're talking about. So open data means that you can use the data, reuse the data, and you can even redistribute the data without any blockage and without any barrier. So this is another characteristics of open data. And then the third one is open data is data that has universal participation. So I can sit down in Rwanda here and access data in Kenya. Somebody in Kenya can sit down in Kenya and access data in the US without restriction. So open data broke the barrier of locational boundary in terms of access to data. And it is very amazing that a lot of startups, technology startups in Africa, even write on the open data in some other countries to make solutions and to create new products that helps our society in Africa. Most of our Google Maps, in most of our cities in Africa, most of those data were gotten from open access from Google as a company. And these are African entrepreneurs using the data gathered by Google that had its headquarters in California to even create products for us in Africa. And this is very, very amazing. So what kind of data are open data are we talking about? We're talking about government data with no national security restrictions. As I've said earlier, government data started the discussion around open data, and it's for transparency and e-participation, and for the people to have participatory governance, you know. So that is the kind of open data that we're talking about. And we're talking about data which does not contain information about specific individuals. So this is talking about the privacy issues around data. When we're talking about open data, as African librarians and African libraries, we are talking about gathering data that is anonymized data, data that we cannot say, okay, this is the name of the person that dropped this response. We're talking about data that is devoid of personal infiltration, personal identity. And that is when we can call a data an open data. Then non-personal data. So open data is data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone. And this is the most beautiful thing about open data. So advantages of open data. So open data enables accountability. So countries of the world who are running .gov websites to enable the world to have access to their websites and their data, it encourages and enables accountability for the government to citizens they are leading. The open data empowers communities. Many technology that we use in Africa today used open data in developing those solutions. I hope we know that even the simple traffic light uses open data. We are registering for passports on the government website. We are using open data. Most of the software that we use these days writes on open data to build these solutions. So open data drives economic growth. So open data encourages more people to be innovative in terms of building new solutions. Especially for African libraries, open data can actually bring a lot of opportunities for us if we can use it well in developing solutions for the community that we serve, whether we are working in a public library or in an academic library or in special libraries. It can actually contribute to the economic stability of our society and also the organizations that we serve. So new knowledge from combined data sources and patterns in data volume. Because of the global big data, we can actually combine data from different sources to gain new insights into a particular subject matter or into a particular subject. So by the time we can use weather data, we use farmers data, and we can combine the data and do a matchup to actually understand the perfect time for farmers to plant. We can use weather forecast data and soil test data to actually determine the kind of seeds that would grow on a particular soil at a particular time. We can use this data across all industries. In agriculture, I hope we know that these days, precision agriculture is the best, where we don't have to waste seeds, we don't have to waste water, we don't have to waste manure and fertilizers, because we are using data to make this decision. And it's been awesome. We've been seeing jeeps across Africa by countries that have embraced the use of data in farming, the use of data in academic, in the academic environment, in measuring learning outcomes of our students. We can use data gathered from all of them, and we mix it with other data and variables that gives us new and deeper insights. So open data may lead to more accurate conclusions and better decisions. As I've said, we don't need to use intuition and rack our brain so much if we actually have access to data and we want to make meaning out of the data. Then improved or new private products and services. I've said this earlier, a lot of technology businesses are coming up because of access to open data. Then transparency and democratic control. So who are the beneficiaries of open data? The citizens, as I've said, we can benefit so much when we have access to a lot of open data. Government, the business environment. This is the peak of the advantages and opportunities that we can get from open data. So for citizens, our decisions have become more precise because we have access to data, and our decision will become richer, and we don't have to make decisions in limbo without being sure of the outcome because we have access to data. Then for the government can get feedbacks from the people assessing the data to make government policies better. And for business environment, it's the truth of the matter is that the business environment are getting more benefits from open data than any other class of beneficiaries in our society, because businesses actually need data more in the 21st century than any other class of people in the society. So this is very dear to my heart because this is the cruise of our discussion in itself. So what type of data are libraries to collect in Africa in this data-driven age? Number one, we must begin to collect indigenous knowledge data. You would agree with me that Africa was evolving over time from oral literature. And it pains my heart that we have lost so much data and information in Africa because of oral literature. It took us a long time before we started to write as a continent. And it is high time we started as African libraries to collect indigenous data, and curate them in our libraries for access of the general public and the global international community. And then number two, we need to start collecting government data. It is rather painful that few countries in Africa are actually embracing the open data movement. And then as African libraries, we need to begin to push the government to do what they are not doing. So for example, I conducted a research recently on Australia, Perth and Adelaide City of Australia, and I conducted a social media analytics of government social media pages in those two cities to understand what exactly they use social media to do in terms of information delivery, action, and communication to the citizens. And it was a very wonderful research that had a global acceptance and recognition from the Australian government itself, because it gave an insight into what exactly is the government using these social media platforms and websites to deliver to the citizen. So as African libraries, we need to learn how to do social media analytics and website analytics of government in order to get insights and data that the general public can have access to. Most citizens cannot access government data in their different countries, but African libraries can become a place of solace where people can come to and get what they need in terms of government information. Then we need to start getting audio and video footages of notable events in Africa. It is rather sad for me that we don't tell our stories as Africans. Other people tell our stories for us, and it is very sad. Sometimes we see people telling our stories in a bad light, and there's nothing we can do about it because we don't even have the data to back up our own claims and standpoints. But if we begin to collect audio and video footages of notable events that we can curate in our libraries for people to access, and whenever we want to refute any claim about our continent that it does not represent us in a good light, we have instruments of support for whatever we are saying. And it all boils down to curating data that other people can have access to, and for them to stop painting our continent in a bad light. Now, qualitative interviews on different academic and social issues. And as I said earlier, when I was defining data, opinion analytics and naked statistics. We need to begin to do this. And then in the next slide, I'm going to be talking about the roles we need to get into to be able to achieve all these type of data that I'm talking about. The internal data of patrons. It is rather sad that some African libraries don't even have data, a detailed data of the patrons that comes to the library. Some African libraries don't even do monthly analytics of how many people used our services from this region of the country, how many students from this department used the library resources this month, for us to have insight into how our resources are being used. Because without us collecting internal data, then we cannot start talking about open data that even impacts the general society. If within the library, we cannot have monthly data analytics on, okay, which collection of the library is least used in this month? Why is it that the serious department doesn't get traffic like the reference department? Why is it that the students use the technology lab more than speaking to the reference librarian directly? So all this data gives us insight into how to run our programs better as a library. So now, privacy issues in dealing with open data. It is good for us to have open data initiatives, but we must also be careful in treating this data. And then we must recognize that in the 21st century, we have more rights to our privacy and we must respect that. So whatever data we are curating as a library or as a professional, we must de-identify the data. Then we must anonymize the data. It is very important. When we go out to conduct interview, we must report the data in such a way that it does not contain the names of those who gave us the responses. It is very, very important. We can make good decisions from data, from open data, without the personality of the people who dropped the responses for us being there. So we need to learn how to de-identify and anonymize our data. Then we need to, like we do in normal research, where we introduce our research to our respondent, and we tell them that the purpose for collecting data is for the purpose of the research in itself, and it would not be used for any other thing. So we must have information release agreement from respondents if we are going to be a library that respects privacy of humans' privacy. So it is very important. These are the two basic things in terms of privacy of data. Once we can de-identify a data and we anonymize the data and we have information release agreement from respondents, we are safe. So what are the roles we need to enter as new African libraries? I've been involved in a lot of discussion about the fact that technology takes people's jobs away. But I'd always taken an iconoclastic approach to this sentence, that technology would not take our jobs away if we can upskill. And it is very important that as African librarians, we are not just librarians that are very, we are not open to change. We must be able to upskill. And the truth is that many library users these days think that because they have access to a lot of open sources, they do not need the librarian. And we must prove them wrong, that we have some particular skills that a normal person on the road or a normal library user does not have. And that is if we can upskill and put our A game on our data analytics skills and even our information retrieval skills. Now, we need to build more data librarians. So there's a specialization now called data librarianship, and it is very important that we begin to embrace this in Africa. And what would a data librarian do in the library? A data librarian would be in charge of the collection, aggregating, and curation of open data for the library. And this is very important because a reference librarian might not be able to do this because it's focusing on something else. So we trainings for librarians who would begin to chaperone data librarianship. Also, it is very important that we stop receiving new skills and doing old jobs. This is a very common thing on the African continent. We send people for trainings, even abroad. We even bring people to our soils to train us on new skills, But by the time we leave the symposiums and the workshops where we have learned new skills, we go back to our old jobs where we cannot even use the new skills that we have received. And it is very sad. So which means we are investing in new skills, but our system is still old in itself. So before we invest in new technologies, we must first of all be ready for change, and we must be technologically ready before we invest in new skills. So as African librarians, we need to stop receiving new skills and doing old jobs. We must put our house in order before we start talking about getting these new skills, because the new skills will be a waste if we go back to our place of work and we still do the old things, you know. Then we must create data department. So in the library, we have different departments, but we must begin to look into having our own data curation department, where all that we do in that department is data collection, curation, and data access on open access on websites and portals to the general public. It is very, very important. Then we must begin to invest in big data and cloud technologies. We are in the 21st century, and everything is going to the cloud because we are limited in terms of physical space and hardware to store all our data. So as African libraries, we must begin to look into investment into big data and cloud technologies. Then we must begin to do what the government is not doing. So we can become aggregators of other open data platforms. We may not be able to get to represent our government directly, but we can become aggregators of other open data platforms, whereby we create an open data platform named after our library. But what we do on that platform is to give access to other open data platforms where our library users can go to directly and have access to various open data platforms. And this is very important for us. We must be data librarians and we must become aggregators of other open data platforms. So in case we are interested in getting open data, these are some open data platforms. Some of them for the society, some of them for the government, but whatever data we are looking for in terms of education, agriculture, sensors, economics, and sociology and other parts of a particular society, we can get it from some of these platforms I've listed here. So we can go through them after this presentation, and we can also continue the conversation on our different platforms. And as I said earlier, this is not an exhaustive conversation about open data because there's a lot of things to discuss. Now, I was able to get this screenshot from the data.gov for the United States, and I was very happy to note that Kenya is doing very fine in terms of open data. And for researchers, for libraries, we can get a lot of useful data on the Kenya data portal. And Tanzania also is actually doing well. I was very impressed to see that they have a lot of data on health, national statistics, and water and sanitation on their open data website. And I was very impressed, and that is why I put them here, for us to know that other African countries can jump on the bandwagon as we embrace this open data. It is very, very important. And it is very important that as African libraries, if we cannot push our government to do this immediately, we can become aggregators of all these other platforms, where we become like the mediator between the open data platforms and the general society. Now, I want us to be very attentive with this. Many of us have at one point or the other downloaded data that are embedded on a PDF or like portable document file, paper or document. And it is very hard for us to extract those data out for direct analysis. So this is called data scrapping. So in data scrapping, do not worry if you had access to data on a PDF. You can actually get those data out as units. So all you need to do is to go to www.pdftables.com and upload PDF document that contains the data you have been able to get from any platform. and click on convert, you'll be surprised that this platform will convert the PDF document to an Excel file that enables you to even lift each of the data points out for direct analysis and begin to look into investing into some of these tools that I've listed here. They are wonderful platforms that can help us manage our data as libraries, no matter how big the data, no matter how big the big data initiative we have is. These platforms like CyberDoc, Azure Archive Storage, Minecast Cloud, WebDrive, Caringo Firefly 2.0, iFabric Vicinity, and Prophet Store Data Services Federator. These platforms are very wonderful to manage our big data and open data platforms as African libraries. So we can begin to invest in some of these platforms. So thank you very much, and I hope you've been able to get one or two things from this presentation, and I'm very glad to have shared this with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, David, for the lovely presentation. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting to know that we are being challenged to be smart workers. I'm challenged to be a smart librarian, so I hope everybody else is. And for sure, we are told that data is the new oil, and us librarians are encouraged to assume our positions as custodians. So at this point in time, we would like David to take some questions. We have some time, so let's see how much he can be able to answer. For those questions that will not be answered, we can rest assure you that we'll be able to answer all of them. The first thing I'd like to mention is that we are going to share the slides and the recording with all the participants in due course, so don't worry about that. Okay. So David, would you like to look at, there's a question about the risks in open data redistribution by Mabel. What are the risks in open data redistribution?
Okay. Okay. As open data, when I was defining open data, one of the characteristics of open data is that it can be redistributed. So there's no risk, however, in open data, as long as the data is gotten from an open data portal. You know, that there's no problem with, there's no privacy or no or risk with redistributing open data, as long as the source of the data is from an open data portal. There's no problem, however, with that. You can redistribute, you can reshare and reshare to the end of the heart, as long as the data is gotten from an open data portal.
Oh, great. And I think there's one critical issue about credibility. As if open data is characterized by anonymities, how can authenticity and credibility be upheld? Because Wikipedia is faulted partly because of this.
Yeah, generally, when we talk about open data, we are not talking about platforms where people just go to and dump things, right? Like Wikipedia. We are talking about credible data from credible sources. So if you follow my conversation very well, I was talking about the fact that the conversation that preceded the open data movement is open governance. And there's no type of data that you want in the 21st century that you cannot get from the government of your country, because they run all the sectors of the economy. And then we also talk about international organizations like World Health Organization and established international NGOs, where we can be sure that we're getting credible data for decision making. It is very important that we anonymize data. Even the data we are getting from government platforms, they are anonymized. And you can be sure that your own input is also part of the data, but your name is not showing on it. And we can use it to make decisions without mentioning anybody's name, you know, in itself. So we're not talking about open platforms. So there's a difference between open data and open access in terms of pros and test platforms. So when we talk about core open data, we're talking about decision-making data that comes from credible platforms like international organizations, United Nations, WHO, then open.gov of any country of the world.
Okay, great. And we have an aspect of indigenous knowledge coming in. Fatima wants to know, how do we gather indigenous knowledge data when the data owners, that's the indigenous people, insist on not sharing such data with libraries?
Okay. Basically, we as individuals and as librarians, we actually come from a particular cultural background or ethnic group or a particular unique community from any part of Africa. And for example, we can begin with ourselves. I know that it's very tedious sometimes to get people to respond to some of the questions we have, but we can start with our own stories. So if you have, for example, there was a time I was looking for a particular family story, and like ancient family story, and I was able to get it from a particular individual who was ready to narrate the experience to me. And I did not stop by just consuming the information and data alone. I actually shared it with a public librarian, and we recorded it so that other people can have access to it in the public library. So we can start with ourselves. If you know that there is a particular unique thing about your culture, about your locality that needs to be told to the world, why not make a video of yourself recording it, or make an audio recording of the history? Go down the memory lane as you understand it. Because when we are gone, that's why they say that the cemetery is the richest place in the world in terms of ideas, because people die with ideas, not shared with people. People die with history, not shared with other people. So we can begin with ourselves, and we should keep trying to at every opportunity we have to get indigenous knowledge. It could even be in the normal conversation we're having with somebody, and we feel the insight the individual is sharing with us is worth curating for future use. Please don't let us hesitate in getting them recorded and saved. Okay,
great. And we have several participants bringing up the issue of accessing government data from government. So many restrictions, and sometimes government is not willing to give data for research. What would be your comment on that? How can librarians just ensure they access that?
In my conversation, I talked about the fact that Africa, we are lagging behind in this open data movement, even though some countries are doing better than some countries. And even for the countries that are doing better, when we check the data on the websites, on their open.gov websites, they might not be the right data we want for our decision making. And it becomes our responsibilities as African librarians and library institutions to begin to push an advocacy movement towards the government in releasing data. And I know that this is a very long journey for us to take, because most governments
Hello, David.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
So, okay, any country that is ready to go fully digital is a country that is ready to be transparent and to release every single data point on the open data platform. But it becomes our responsibility, and this is why I said this conversation is a continuous conversation where we are going to start. Libraries will begin advocacy, serious advocacy for government to release data that the society can use for decision making. The government oftentimes decide to release the data they want to release, and not the data that will do us good in itself. But we must begin to be curators of and aggregators of data and be advocates for open data in our different countries. And the movement must start with the library. when the national librarian of a country keeps leading an advocacy push for open data in his or her country, I think the impact will be more than for an ordinary citizen to keep pushing for open data. Because when the stakeholders push an advocacy move, it yields bigger results at the end of the day.
Okay, great. And there's the aspect of intellectual property right and copyright. John Adebayo would like to know, in the case of de-identification and anonymization of open data gathering and storage, who would own the intellectual property right? And generally, would you comment on copyrights to open data?
Okay, in open data, we are not denying the fact that the platform releasing the data as the copyright for the data, but in open data generally, the fact that you have decided to make the data public, and not only public to your organization, but to the whole world, it has reduced your power of copyright in itself, but it is very important that as users of data, we give credit, to where we got the data from. But in open data, I've never seen any open data platform, especially government, that fights people not recognizing them as the curator of the data, because we feel everybody needs an access to the data, and nobody should lay claim of the data. So copyright issues and intellectual property issues are somewhat immaterial when we talk about open data. It's more or less like doing social good for the society, and we are just like doing the society good by making the data open and for the society to have access to it generally. But in the history of open data, I've never seen any open data platform claiming intellectual property and advanced copyright on the data released to the public, because we feel people can make several forms of decision from this open data.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And you have challenged us to be smart librarians. Mohammed would like to know, how can we store raw data that is not in digital format?
Okay, so I talked about the fact that we have data stored in text or on traditional documents. There are technology these days that can, if you have data stored in traditional formats, you can actually, through digitization, when you digitize, you convert the document to PDF, and you take the document to a PDF table platform that I talked about, and you can, with OCR technology, optical character recognition technology, you can actually extract this data out in data points, real life data points that you can use for direct analysis. So that is not a problem at all. There are technologies in place that can help you convert your traditional data in the future to digital data. So, and then for us to be smart librarians, we need a lot of soft technology skills in terms of even our information search skills. Most African librarians need to know this fully so that we can help our communities better. Many people think they can go to Google and get what they need, but the truth is many of them spend 3 hours, 4 hours searching for information they don't even have access to, without knowing how to use Boolean logics. Some of them don't know how to use to search for file formats. Some of them don't know how to use search for time frame information. And these are the skills that librarians need to possess to be above and ahead of our patrons.
Okay, great. And we have another interesting aspect about the situation in most African countries. One of our participants says he is aware that open data is part of the open movement that includes open access, open education, open government, etc. And you did tell us that USA, UK, and some African countries have adopted open government and they have laws. But what about countries, some countries in Africa that do not have freedom of information? How can they implement this?
Okay, so as I said, it's a long journey for us, and we must keep evolving and keep pushing. Open data, even though all the open movement, even though it's a global phenomenon that the global international and international society have been pushing for, but it is strictly intertwined with the African countries' policy in terms of technology policy. So if there's no freedom of information in a particular country, you can be sure that open data and open education and open source may not really thrive in such countries. But which means we have a lot of responsibilities as Librarians to keep pushing for a lot of rights in terms of freedom of information, open source for softwares and education, and open government. So we are having this conversation as a beginning of an era for information activism in Africa, for technology activism in all our different countries. It is very important for us to know that the fourth industrial revolution reality is coming upon us as a continent, and we are far, far behind as Africans. And we need to start that because we are the custodians of information, we are the custodians of knowledge, and we are the future for information access to our various communities.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of participants have talked about lack of commitment, low funding, you know, by most governments and institutions. And I think you've tackled on that already a little bit. But I want you to comment on a participant who says, truly data is the oil of this age. This is Philip. What do you think about network connectivity and connections? How can African libraries enjoy such privileges, looking at these challenges that we have?
Yes, thank you very much. We cannot deny the fact that internet connectivity is a problem in most African countries. And then when we talk about technology readiness, I've conducted a lot of research in the past on technology readiness, and I discover that when we're talking about technology readiness, the first readiness is electricity power supply, and the second readiness is internet connectivity. Without these two, we cannot become very successful in any other form of technology that we want to talk about. So, but it's very important that African libraries begin to explore alternative source of power and internet connectivity for us to enjoy this thing we are talking about. And it's all about prioritization. You know, if African libraries that are even low on budget and funding can begin to reprioritize, I think we are going to be on a journey to enjoy. But we cannot deny the fact that network issues and internet connectivity is a big problem for us in Africa. And even though some countries are doing better than some, and some organizations are doing better than some organizations, but we should stay committed to ensuring that we see changes. So this conversation is more or less like we are inciting ourselves and we're encouraging ourselves to be agents of change in the area of open data, information rights, and government open data in our different countries.
Okay, great. So our dear presenter, is there any question you'd like to attend to from the ones that have not been answered, or is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Okay, I've seen a lot of questions there, but I think some of them still touches on some of the things I've answered. Risk of open data, I've answered that. Somebody said, does open data deal with unprocessed information or both? So it deals with both. On some open data platform, you have processed data and you have unprocessed data. It depends. So somebody's information could be another person's data, and somebody's data could be another person's information. So it's both ways. So somebody said, is it possible for libraries to implement open data without, which encourages freedom such as freedom of information laws? It is not possible. And then, but it is possible to be aggregators of other open platforms. You know, there's no crime in becoming an aggregator for open platforms, like what most of our open access journal platform does. And then here somebody says some data cannot be accessed free. You need to pay. That means for it to be. If you pay for a data, that is not open data. For the person that for Felicia Kubepio, any data you are paying for is not open data. From the word open, it means that anybody has access to it without any restriction. You know, so most of the questions there have actually been touched on in some of the things I've answered, and I really enjoyed the conversation with us all.
Okay, thank you so much, David, for the presentation. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure my participants have appreciated, and we do hope that we've managed to meet most of the participant expectations. We received an amazing number of expectations from our participants, and it's amazing that we have over 60 questions. So Stanley in the chat box has sent a link. If your question has not been answered or you would like to ask a new question, kindly use that link, and David will be able to answer all your questions after the webinar. Otherwise, great, and thank you everyone. It is our hope that you're going to use the knowledge that we've shared today during our webinar to better your library services. And just a reminder once more, all the webinar materials, including the slides and presentation recordings, will be made available to all of you in due course. And if your institution is not a member of AFLIA, you are missing out. Kindly consider joining the team. This is the African team. Kindly visit aflia.net and get more details. And on behalf of Mr. David Adepoju and the AFLIA communications team, thank you for joining us today. This has been Velenasi Mwale Munsanje. Have a great day. Goodbye.